Washington Times, May 12, 1926. General strike ends. British strike called off. Miners return to work. Negotiations on. Ernest Bevin, laborite, who is a trades union chief, was at the conference that resulted in the calling of strike. J. H. Thomas, laborite, who was at session with Baldwin today, which finished with strike's end. Miners seen leaving mines. Now they'll return pending settlement of the miners' wage scale. The workmen will return to duty. Thus the strike in England has ended. Other workmen resume tomorrow. Troops will be withdrawn from active duty. No more guns. No more artillery. No more convoys for food trains. The army, though all set for action, can now go home. Bevin, MacDonald, and Henderson, three prominent figures in the conference, is Downing Street, which brought the strike to a conclusion and sent workmen to duty. Britain's great strike ends, but miners remain out. By H.K. Reynolds, International News Service. London, May 12. The general strike has been cancelled. Orders to this effect were issued today by the Trades Union Congress, and thus England's 9 days of industrial warfare comes to an end. All transport and other essential workers were ordered to resume work tomorrow. The mine strike was not called off, but the men may return to work pending new negotiations. The situation as it now stands, with both sides maintaining a considerable amount of secrecy, is that the general strike was called off by the Trades Union Congress in order to permit the government to resume negotiations with both the coal miners and the coal operators. This action was taken, it is understood, after assurances have been given that the government agreed to a program for future negotiations between the miners and the operators. The basis of the new negotiations between the miners and the operators is in general as follows. The government subsidy to the coal industry shall be temporarily extended. The wages of miners will be restored to the scale in operation prior to May 1st, when lockout notices were posted, pending negotiations. A national wage commission shall be constituted to adjust wages. The government will undertake to carry out the terms of the report of the Royal Coal Commission for reorganization of the coal industry. The cancellation was based on the following memorandum agreed upon by Sir Herbert Samuel, chairman of the Royal Commission, and continued on page 2, column 1.
Adams County Witness, May 12, 1926. Hint peace in British strike. Federation Executive Cook thinks peace will be soon, might be today. London, May 12. Peace negotiations in Great Britain's general strike definitely can be said to be going on under the surface. They have not reached an official status, and what results they will achieve remains to be seen, but a man high in the labor ranks said late yesterday afternoon that parleys were proceeding. They were in such a delicate state, however, he added, that nothing further could be said for the moment. He said it was possible something tangible would be forthcoming today. Indications of any easing in the deadlock became more pronounced yesterday afternoon. A J. Cook, miners' chief, said, "Peace is possible at any moment, on terms that will give economic security to the miners." The Miners' Federation executive, Cook said, reviewed the situation in the light of messages received from all over the coal fields appealing to it to stand firm against a compromise either on hours, wages, or national agreement. "I desire to inform the miners and the general public that we are as firm as we were when the miners decided unanimously that there was to be no reduction in wages." Cook further said, "There are many influences at work to find a bridge, but whatever bridge is found, it must be one to secure the status quo, at least for the miners." At almost the same time, a government spokesman said to newspaper men, without being unduly optimistic, "I think we may say that the tide has turned. There is a tendency all over the country for the strikers to drift back to work."
The Montgomery Advertiser, May 12, 1926. Industrial peace looms on horizon in British strike. Union conference and special cabinet meeting taken as indicating important movement is on foot. Leaders to confer with Premier this morning. Member of Parliament declares strikers can be held responsible for damage. London, May 12, AP. Prolonged discussion at Trades Union headquarters, which lasted until an early hour this Wednesday morning, simultaneously with a special cabinet meeting held in the House of Commons, which was followed by further ministerial conversations in Downing Street, were taken as indicating that an important peace move is afoot. Consequently, there is strong hope in some quarters that the strike may be called off before long. While it is impossible to obtain any authoritative statement on what passed at Union headquarters in Eccleston Square, it is known that the matters under discussion were of great consequence. If there were no other grounds for this deduction, the fact that the Premier and several other ministers, as well as some prominent officers of the Labour Department, remained at the Prime Minister's residence until after 1 o'clock, in expectation of receiving a communication from the Labour leaders, would be sufficient to show the importance of the discussions. Not until the officials received a definite message that the Labour representatives would not for the present make a visit to Downing Street did they separate and leave for their homes. It became known soon afterwards that the trade union delegation probably would confer with the Premier and other ministers sometime this morning after another meeting of the Labour leaders. While apparently matters have not progressed to a point enabling the Trades Union Congress and the Parliamentary Labourites to submit any definite proposal to the government, the belief is generally expressed that not many hours will elapse before the Premier and his colleagues will receive from the Trades Union Council some important communication. It is understood that the executives of the Miners' Federation, who left Eccleston Square more than an hour before the Labour conference adjourned, will return there at 10 a.m. to re-meet the Trades Union Council. Continued on page 3.
The Indianapolis Times, May 12, 1926. British miners balk peace terms despite end of general strike. Coal workers declare trade unions acted on own responsibility. Negotiations expected. Subsidy will be renewed, government agrees. By United Press, London, May 12. The miners' executive this afternoon rejected the Trades Union Council's proposals for a solution of the coal miners' dispute. They explained that in calling off the general strike, the Trades Union Council took sole responsibility. Withdrawal of the general strike order was announced after a meeting at Premier Baldwin's residence, 10 Downing Street, between members of the government and representatives of the Trades Union Council. A.J. Cook, secretary of the Miners' Federation, soon afterward told the United Press that the coal strike would continue. It is presumed that negotiations to end the coal strike will begin at once. There is no change in the situation as far as we are concerned, Cook said. There will be no resumption of work by the miners until a delegate conference has been called. Baldwin cheered. Premier Baldwin announced in the House of Commons at 2:20 p.m. that negotiations to settle the dispute in the coal industry would be resumed immediately. The members punctuated the speech with cheers. The Prince of Wales and the Duke of York again were in the gallery. Philip Snowden and Ramsay MacDonald, Labourites, and Sir John Simon, Liberal leader, did not cheer Baldwin with any great enthusiasm. They said the victory was one of common sense for the whole people. Cook today summoned miners' delegations from all parts of the country are to meet in London, Friday, to decide whether the coal strike shall continue beyond that day. It was a dramatic announcement that came to the waiting crowd shortly after 1 p.m. that today would see a close of the labor difficulties. Arthur Pugh, president of the Trades Union Congress, told Premier Baldwin that the strike would end today, and this announcement was forwarded to the group outside. So great is the momentum of the stoppage, however, that several days. Turn to page 13. London mad with joy as crisis ends. Women weep, men dance, shout war is over. Baldwin cheered. By United Press, London, May 12th. Scenes of uproarious joy accompanied the news of the end of the general strike in London streets today. Along the Strand, which is comparable to New York's Broadway, women wept for joy and men danced. The strikers joined in the celebration. The news everywhere was greeted with cheers. Commons roars. The good news set the House of Commons to roaring cheers as soon as it convened at 3 p.m. The members rose and shouted for Baldwin for 5 minutes. Unofficial couriers legging it down the Victoria Embankment toward Blackfriars Bridge, across Westminster Bridge to South London, and down Whitehall toward Trafalgar Square and the Strand, first started the news of peace circulating through London. Downing Street had been blocked off by police when the peace conference began. Suddenly the doors opened and newspaper men rushed out with the word that the strike was off. There were a few excited cheers, and then the crowd scattered in all directions, eager to pass on the tidings. Streets thronged. Tens of thousands of mimeographed newspapers were bought by the excited crowds. The streets filled rapidly as the news spread. each newcomer seeking the latest information from those about him. Stale newspapers sold as souvenirs of the troublous times for as much as 25 cents each. The war's over, the crowd shouted as they exchanged congratulations on the end of the industrial struggle. Radio bulletins announcing the end of the strike attracted tremendous crowds in front of many shops. Traffic was blocked as strike-weary Londoners shoved into the crowds which were reading the notices. Alert newsboys sold many papers in the streets for as much as they could get, taking care to run away before the purchasers discovered the papers contained no news of the peace.
Douglas Daily Dispatch, May 13, 1926. British general strike called off. London walks or begs a lift. With the few stray buses jammed, most of workaday London walks to work or begs a ride from private autos. This suburban miss, facing a tramp of miles to her office, has hit on a novel appeal to help her along. Try squinting your eyes and see how clearly the radio picture shows up. Miners remain out, but effort will be made to end strike. By Dispatch AP Wire. London, May 12th. Great Britain's gigantic industrial strike, a test of endurance which lasted 9 days, is ended. The General Council of the Trades Union Conference, heeding the efforts of Sir Herbert Samuel, chairman of the Royal Coal Commission, as private mediator, today withdrew its order for a sympathetic strike of the trades union in support of the coal miners. The coal miners remain out, but with the assurance of Premier Baldwin that no stone will be left unturned to bring the interrupted negotiations between the miners and mine owners to a close satisfactory to all. Now, the nation has borne with good humor and Spartan fortitude the inconveniences and annoyances inevitable to any general stoppage of industry, is preparing to pick up the pieces and count the cost. Work is being slowly resumed throughout the country tonight. There are still many differences to be adjusted before industry can be in full swing again. First, there is the question of the re-engagement of the men who have been notified that their places were filled. Then, two, groups in various sections have announced their unwillingness to resume work until the government emergency control is entirely removed. But on the whole, the nation has joyfully accepted the end of what the Trades Union Congress, with reason, has characterized as one of the most orderly stoppages in the history of industrial disputes. Premier Baldwin and his ministers awaited a call from union leaders until after midnight, but it was not until noon today that the delegation proceeded to number 10 Downing Street, the Premier's official residence. Here the proceedings were brief. In a few words, the Premier was informed that the labor men were there to inform him of the termination of the general strike. At the same time, they relied upon his putting into effect his previous promises of a square deal for all. News spreads rapidly. The termination of the strike was broadcast over the radio, announced in Parliament, and spread rapidly to every corner of the country. Upon just what basis the negotiations for the resumption of work will be taken up has not been revealed to the general public. Even if already decided upon by the leaders and government, the miners tonight are steadfast in their position that they will not accept any proposals involving a reduction of wages. The mine owners have not been heard from. It is a widespread opinion and hope of the country that the terms of Sir Herbert Samuel's memorandum, submitted to the Trades Union Congress in the early hours of the morning, and the Coal Commission's report would form the foundation for a final and lasting settlement. In Premier Baldwin's words, the ending of the general strike represents a victory of common sense, and each side feels that it has saved its face. Probably the greatest laurels go to the British public who refused to be scared or stampeded, took what came with calm and fortitude, and most of the people are willing to pay their meed of praise to the strikers. Woe, for the most part, acted with moderation and studiously refrained from incidents that might have produced grave results. The government emergency services remained in full force tonight, but there is every assurance, should order continue, that they will be withdrawn at the earliest moment. Gazette suspends. The British Gazette, the government's official newspaper, published its last issue tonight, and instructions have been given to the different government departments to be ready to disband the force of voluntary workers gathered in the stress and strain of the last week's developments at a moment's notice. At Hull and one or two other provincial towns, the strikers declared they would not return until military control was removed, and in some other instances groups wanted assurance that all who had walked out would be reinstated in their employment. The government announced that it had no power to compel employers to take back every man who had been on strike, nor had it entered into any obligations to do so. This was one of the requests made by J.H. Thomas at the noon conference with Premier Baldwin, that the Premier would use his good offices to bring about the reinstatement of the men, and to ask employers to make the position as easy and smooth as possible. The members of the cabinet were too tired tonight to come to any definite conclusions regarding the procedure to be followed in the resumption of the negotiations between the miners and owners. It is understood that the Premier has planned to call both parties into conference tomorrow after the government is assured that the general strike is really and in good faith ended. The cabinet at its meeting tomorrow, at which the general lines of the government's policy will be laid down, will first of all take up Sir Herbert Samuel's memorandum, which thus far being only a private document, has not officially been called to the government's attention. The Prime Minister, in a message to the nation broadcast tonight, appealed to the country to forget past quarrels and refrain from recriminations. He begged the employers to be generous and urged the workers and the whole nation to cooperate in restoring the country's industrial welfare. Washington is pleased with end of strike. By Dispatch AP Wire. Washington, May 12th. Declaration of armistice in the British general strike swept a wave of gladsome news over Washington today, where reaction in a measure approaching the emotions stirred up at the ending of the World War. The terse announcement, British general strike settled, was enough to bring pronounced smiles of relief and satisfaction. The majority was not interested in the details, although a few hesitated to comment in their absence. High government officials, leaders of organized labor, and the great industrial heads now in Washington for the Chamber of Commerce meeting all had realized what stupendous economic effects the strike might have had it continued indefinitely. Secretary Hoover of the Commerce Department, who had repeatedly declined to talk about the strike while it was in progress, confined his sentiment in regard to the settlement to 13 words, declaring, "The whole world is relieved and glad that a settlement has been reached." William Green, president of the American Federation of Labor, said the controversy had proven to labor in this country the soundness of making wage contracts and keeping them inviolate. The working people, in common with other groups, he added, were gratified to learn of the settlement. News that peace was declared was received enthusiastically at the meeting of the United States Chamber of Commerce, where John W. O'Leary, its president, announced that a form of rebellion had been put down. British King urges peace in industry. By Dispatch AP Wire. London, May 12th. King George today issued a message to the people of Great Britain, calling upon them to forget the bitterness engendered because of the general strike and to cooperate for a lasting future industrial peace. His message follows, "To my people, the nation has just passed through a period of extreme anxiety. It was today announced that the general strike has been brought to an end. At such a moment, it is supremely important to bring together all my people to confront the difficult situation which still remains. This task requires the cooperation of all able and well-disposed men in the country. Even with such help, it will be difficult, but it will not be impossible. Let us forget whatever elements of bitterness the events of the past few days have created, and only remember how steady and how orderly the country remained though severely tested. Let us forthwith address ourselves to the task of bringing to being a peace which will be lasting because, forgetting the past, it looks only to the future with the hopefulness of a united people. Public happy at close of the great strike." By Dispatch AP Wire. London, May 12th. The satisfaction of the general public at the termination of the strike was unmistakably manifested in London tonight. The streets, which have recently shown a marked lack of their customary animation, were astir with lively crowds. The theaters, whose audiences were meager during the strike, were filled with people, and the restaurants were the gathering places of thousands. The guests in many instances were standing and singing Rule Britannia. The Archbishop of Canterbury, who with other dignitaries of the church had striven for many days to bring about peace, issued a message of thanksgiving to the churches for the relief of national anxiety and prayers for divine guidance in carrying out the resumed negotiations. Cancellation of the strike has not, however, been received everywhere with gratification by the workers. The London Dock District, which has been the most turbulent part of the capital during the upheaval, was the scene tonight of a noisy adverse demonstration. A huge crowd held some of the streets displaying bad temper. More than 40 persons were treated at the hospitals for injuries. At Hull, the local trades union resolved to continue the strike until continued on page 8.
Alaska Daily Empire, May 13, 1926. Strike photo by radio. This is the first picture of an actual strike scene in London to reach the United States by the new commercial radio process. The three labor czars are shown, left to right, Arthur Henderson, Ramsay MacDonald, and J.H. Thomas, on the way to a conference. British labor trouble does not seem over. Employers fail to take back men who walked out, labor threats. London, May 13th. The Trades Union Congress, after a special session at which was considered the failure of employers to re-engage workers throughout the country, issued a statement which said the trades union have no alternative but to resist to the utmost any attempt to impose humiliating terms on the workers. Our resisting power is unimpaired. We cannot tolerate imposition of conditions designed to destroy trade unionism, and peace without vindictiveness is impossible. Unless the attacks are ended immediately, the workers will not surrender their hard-earned gains. Many forecast a split between the Trades Union Congress and the miners. Miners meeting off. London, May 13th. Secretary Cook announced this afternoon that the meeting of the miners' delegates scheduled for tomorrow has been postponed. The printers are still out, although the National Society of Operative Printers informed the London newspapers that men were available and were awaiting the wishes of the proprietors. The employers said they were unable to say yet what course will be taken. One organization announced no strikers will be taken back. The iron and steel works are idle awaiting resumption of coal mining. Situation in Scotland. The situation in Scotland is deadlocked. The tramway men at Edinburgh have resumed work, but the railway men, printers, and engineers continued on a strike and have held meetings to discuss terms on which they will resume work. Strike was demonstration. London, May 13th. Arthur Pugh, head of the General Council of the Trades Union Congress, said the trades union movement of the general strike had given a demonstration to the world of discipline, unity, continued on page 2.
The Key West Citizen, May 13, 1926. Remarkable improvement in conditions shown following ending of Great Britain's strike. Many workers, however, endeavor to secure better terms. By Associated Press, London, May 13. Great Britain's general strike theoretically is over, but practically is still continuing to function this morning more or less as it has for the past several days. Through the country there is a disposition thus far on the part of many unions to stand out. There are various reasons for this. Among them are the men's desire in some instances to take advantage of the strike to exact better terms of employment, sympathy with the miners, who are still on strike, refusal of some employers to discharge volunteer workers to make room for the old employees, and the edict issued by other employers that they will not take back the workers until they have destroyed their union cards. This situation is possible because the Trades Union Congress, in calling off the general strike, issued orders that the men were not to return to work pending instructions from the individual unions. Comments were heard today that it was far easier to start a general strike than to halt one. There was some improvement in conditions this morning, traffic being a little better, but the citizens who retired last night with the thought that his troubles were over was amazed upon awakening to find that he still had to walk to work and to endure other inconveniences. Even in London, volunteers continued to man the few buses running, hardly any tram cars were functioning, and the subway service was about the same as yesterday. The authorities predicted that this would begin to right itself forthwith, although it would take considerable time before conditions approached anything like normal. As far as the miners are concerned, their strike against lower wages and longer hours continues, and nothing is expected to develop before their national meeting here tomorrow.